Nothing has been so important for hundreds, even thousands of years of human civilization as the question of the distribution of income. In other words, do we spread the goods and services that we produce in any economy more or less evenly across the society, giving everybody roughly the same, a little more, a little less, but roughly? Or do we allow there to be enormous gaps between a small number of people who gather a huge amount of the income into their hands and a vast amount of people who barely get by, if they get by at all? Which do we want? Equal incomes, unequal incomes? Slightly unequal, vastly unequal? That question has led a large number of people to the conclusion that while some inequality is acceptable, it should be kept within limits. We should not allow vast accumulations of wealth in the hands of a tiny number and vast economic difficulty for most of the people. That's been the dream of radicals. It's been the dream of Democrats with a small d. It's been the dream of many. It was, for example, the dream of Thomas Jefferson in making the American Revolution back in the 18th century. How do you realize a roughly equal, an egalitarian distribution of income if you want one? That's been the conundrum, that's been the mystery, because everything that's been tried so far hasn't succeeded, at least in most of the world, most of the time. And one reason is that the people who wanted a more equal distribution of income didn't understand that in order to get that, you have to change the way enterprises, firms, companies, whatever you call them, how they're organized. Let's see how that works. Today, in a capitalist organization, which is what we mostly have, a tiny group of people at the top make the key decision. The major shareholders of companies, a small group of people, and the board of directors that they select, a group of people numbering 15 to 20 at most. They're the ones who make a crucial decision. What portion of the profits, of the net revenue of a company, are distributed to whom? They're the people who decided, for example, starting in the 1970s, to give enormous pay packages to the top executives of a company, to give millions, then tens of millions, and now to some executives, hundreds of millions of dollars, while everybody else gets none of the profits, none of the net revenues distributed to them. Oh, sure, there's a handful of companies that have what they call profit sharing, but there are very few companies, and they don't share much of their profits either. Most profits in most companies are distributed by the board of directors and by the major shareholders who make the final decisions to a tiny handful of people. And that's where the inequality of income in our society comes from. It doesn't come from paying outlandish salaries to athletes, actors, nuh-uh. The bulk of wealth in this country accrues to people who get it either in high salaries as executives or in dividend payments because they're major shareholders and have a lot of shares. If we had a worker self-directed enterprises, if the workers in every enterprise collectively and democratically made the decisions, they would also make the decisions of how to distribute the net revenues or profits of the companies whose profits, after all, their labor creates. And guess what? Every poll shows, every study shows the same. The workers, if they made it directly, collectively, democratically, would never give a tiny number of people vast income while everybody else has a problem. Majority rule would dictate that you distribute the income in a much less unequal way. There might still be more for this kind of work and less for that. More for this official than less for that. More for this worker whose work is difficult or dirty or hard in one way or another. Sure. But in general, working people together in a community organized workplace would distribute the profits of enterprise in a much less unequal way. There's a way to get greater equality of income that will work. and it will show why and how trying to get greater equality without changing the workplace has been such a difficult and ultimately unsuccessful